In 1947, snowdrifts buried entire villages across Britain for 7 weeks straight. Trains stopped. Power lines fell. But most families survived, not because of emergency services, but because their grandmothers knew things we have completely forgotten. Number 18 on this list was standard practice in every council house in the 1950s, but central heating made us abandon it overnight. And number 7 was recently tested by engineers at Sheffield University, who called it remarkably effective. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Our grandparents did not have thermostats, heated seats, or Ocado deliveries. They had knowledge. And when the beast from the east hit in 2018 and half the country panicked because Tesco ran out of bread, it proved something. We forgot how to cope. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because some of these might actually save you this winter. Let us count down the 25 smartest winter survival secrets that vanished from British homes. Number 25. Newspaper wall insulation. Before cavity wall insulation existed, your grandmother had her own solution: layers of old newspaper. She would paste sheets of the Daily Mirror behind wardrobes, inside cupboard backs, and along the skirting boards of outside walls. The trapped air between layers created genuine insulation. In the 1940s, a newspaper cost a penny. By the time she had finished lining the back bedroom, she had spent less than sixpence and raised the room temperature by several degrees. Some families layered newspaper under carpets and lino too, adding a buffer between cold flagstone floors and bare feet. During the war, the Ministry of Information actually recommended this. You could hear the paper rustling behind the furniture when the wind picked up. That sound meant the insulation was working, trapping cold air before it reached the room. Modern homeowners spend thousands on insulation. Your grandmother did it with last week's news and a pot of flour paste. Number 24. Chimney balloon. Every terraced house had a fireplace, and every fireplace that was not in use became a wind tunnel. Your grandfather solved this by stuffing a tightly packed ball of newspaper or old rags inside the chimney, just above the damper. Some families used an inflated rubber bladder, or even a football bladder, wedged into the flue. The draft stopped dead. A room that had been losing heat all day suddenly held warmth for hours. The trick was remembering to remove it before lighting a fire. More than one family forgot and filled the front room with smoke. But those who remembered saved shillings every week on coal. In homes where coal cost around £2 a ton in 1952, and a family might burn a ton a month through winter, blocking unused chimneys was not a tip. It was survival arithmetic. Number 23. Bread poultice for chest infections. When a child came down with a winter chest cold, your grandmother did not reach for Vicks. She reached for the bread bin. A bread poultice was made by soaking thick slices of stale bread in boiling water, wrapping the hot, soggy mass in a muslin cloth, and laying it flat on the child's chest. The moist heat penetrated deep, loosening congestion and easing breathing within minutes. The bread held warmth far longer than a hot water bottle, sometimes 30 minutes or more. Some grandmothers added a smear of goose fat to the skin first for extra penetration. A loaf cost about 9 pence in 1953. The poultice used bread that had already gone stale, bread that would otherwise be wasted. Doctors in the 1940s actually prescribed this alongside aspirin. Modern medicine moved on, but the principle of moist heat therapy is now used in physiotherapy clinics at £50 a session. Your grandmother did it for free with yesterday's loaf. Number 22. The warming shelf above the range. That cast iron range in your grandmother's kitchen did more than cook food. It heated the entire house. But the cleverest feature was the warming shelf, a metal ledge above the hot plate where she would place boots, socks, mittens, and school shirts overnight. By morning, everything was bone dry and warm to the touch. Children would pull on heated socks before walking to school in the dark. Fathers would step into warm boots before the 6 a.m. shift. That warming shelf ran on residual heat from the banked fire, costing nothing extra. The smell of warm wool and drying leather was the smell of a winter morning. When central heating and tumble dryers arrived in the 1970s, the warming shelf disappeared. But it solved a problem we still have: cold, damp clothes on a freezing morning. Number 21. Goose fat for weatherproofing. Every November, your grandmother rendered goose fat from the Christmas bird and saved it in ceramic jars. That fat had a second life beyond roast potatoes. She would rub it into leather boots and shoes, working it into every seam and stitch until the leather turned dark and supple. The fat created a waterproof barrier that kept feet dry through rain, sleet, and slush. A single goose produced enough fat to weatherproof the entire family's boots for the season. Some grandmothers also rubbed goose fat onto exposed skin before sending children out into biting wind. Fishermen along the East Coast and channel swimmers used the same technique. The fat sat on the skin's surface and created an insulating layer against wind chill. When synthetic waterproofing sprays arrived in the 1960s, goose fat fell out of fashion. But the principle remains identical, and goose fat is now sold in outdoor shops for exactly this purpose at £6 a tin. Number 20. Mustard foot bath. When someone came home soaked and shivering, the first thing your grandmother did was fill a basin with hot water and add 1 tablespoon of mustard powder. Feet went in immediately. The mustard created a warming sensation that drew blood to the extremities, restoring circulation and raising core body temperature faster than sitting by the fire. Coleman's mustard powder cost about 4p a tin in the 1950s and lasted for months of foot baths. The ritual was non-negotiable. If you came through that door wet and cold, you sat with your feet in that basin until your cheeks turned pink. Some families added a pinch of ginger powder too. The mustard bath was the front-line defense against catching cold after exposure. It did not just warm you up. It made you feel like the cold had never touched you. Number 19. The brick bed warmer. Hot water bottles leaked and stone bottles cracked, but a house brick wrapped in flannel lasted forever. Your grandmother would place an ordinary clay brick on the hearth beside the fire for an hour before bedtime. Once heated through, she wrapped it in old flannel or a towel and slid it between the sheets at the foot of the bed. That brick radiated gentle warmth for hours, far longer than a hot water bottle. The thermal mass of clay held heat steadily, never scorching, never cooling too fast. A brick cost nothing. Every house had one spare somewhere. Children would curl their feet around it under the blankets and fall asleep to its steady warmth. Some families had a dedicated bed brick, smooth from years of use, wrapped in its own flannel sleeve. When rubber hot water bottles became cheap in the 1960s, the bed brick vanished overnight. But anyone who has ever touched a warm brick knows nothing else quite matches that slow, even, radiating heat. First pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. Salt was not just for chips. In the coldest weeks of winter, your grandmother kept a bag of coarse salt by the back door, not for cooking, for survival. A handful scattered on the front step before bed prevented ice forming overnight. But the cleverer trick was heating salt in a heavy pan, pouring it into a cloth bag, and using it as a body warmer. Heated salt holds temperature remarkably well, sometimes staying warm for over an hour. Miners' wives in County Durham used heated salt bags tucked inside coat linings when their husbands left for the early shift. The same bag could be reheated night after night. A pound of coarse salt cost a few pence and never wore out. We buy expensive hand warmers now, chemical packs that work once and get thrown away. Your grandmother reheated the same bag of salt every winter for years. Number 17. Porridge left overnight on the range. On the coldest mornings, your grandmother's porridge was already waiting when the family came downstairs. She had put the oats and water in a heavy pot on the range the night before, letting them cook slowly on residual heat through the darkness. By 6 in the morning, the porridge was thick, creamy, and piping hot, without anyone having to tend it. A pound of oats cost about 5p in the 1950s and fed a family of 5 for most of the week. That slow overnight cooking broke down the oats completely, producing a smoother, more digestible porridge than anything made in a microwave today. The pot would be warm to the touch all morning. Children ate bowls of it with a drop of golden syrup or a pinch of salt, depending on whether the family was English or Scottish. That argument still has not been settled, but the trick of overnight porridge on residual heat has been completely forgotten. Number 16. Sacking and Hessian draft excluders. Every door in a 1950s terrace had a gap at the bottom wide enough to slide a newspaper through. Your grandmother's answer was a draft excluder made from old Hessian sacking stuffed with sawdust, sand, or old stockings. She would sew the sacking into a long sausage shape, fill it tight, and press it against the base of every external door. Some families made them from old trouser legs. The weight of the sand held them in place without fastening. That simple tube of filled fabric could cut a room's heat loss dramatically. You could feel the difference the moment it was placed. The whistling draft around your ankles stopped. The fire did not have to work as hard. Your grandmother made these from materials that cost nothing. Old sacks from the greengrocer, sawdust from the joiner, sand from the builder's yard. We buy foam draft strips now from B&Q for £8 a roll. They peel off after one season. Her sacking excluders lasted a decade. Number 15. Blackout curtain layering. During the war, every window had to be covered with thick blackout material. But when the war ended, your grandmother did not throw those curtains away. She hung them behind her regular curtains as a second layer. That double layer of fabric created an ARR pocket between window and room, acting as surprisingly effective insulation. Some families added a third layer, a net curtain closest to the glass, creating 2 insulating air gaps. The difference on a January night was dramatic. Rooms stayed warmer for hours after the fire died down. The blackout material was dense, often rubberized on one side, and blocked drafts that thin cotton curtains could not stop. When lined curtains became available in shops during the 1960s, the old blackout layers were finally discarded. But the principle, multiple layers with trapped air gaps, is exactly what thermal curtains sold today for £40 a pair are designed to do. Number 14. Camphorated oil chest rub. Before VapoRub became a household name, your grandmother made her own winter chest rub from camphorated oil bought at the chemist for about 6p a bottle. She would warm the oil between her palms and rub it firmly onto the chest and back of any child with a winter cough. Then she would cover the skin with a square of flannel, pin it to the vest, and send the child to bed. The camphor vapors rose gently through the night, clearing airways and soothing coughs. Some grandmothers added a few drops of eucalyptus oil to boost the effect. The flannel square was essential. It held the warmth against the skin, kept the oil from soaking into bed sheets, and created a warm compress that lasted until morning. Chemists stocked camphorated oil as a winter essential right through to the 1970s. It was standard issue in school sick rooms and district nurse bags. The smell of camphor meant winter as surely as frost on the window. Number 13. The banking of the fire was the single most important survival skill in any coal-heated home. Banking the fire at night meant your grandmother would rake the hot coals together, cover them with a thick layer of coal dust or slack, and close down the damper until only the faintest glow remained. The fire would smolder through the night at minimum burn, keeping the room above freezing and the chimney warm enough to restart easily in the morning. Done properly, banking meant the fire never went completely out from October to March. The skill was precise. Too much slack and the fire suffocated. Too little and it burned through by midnight, leaving the house to freeze. Your grandmother could judge the exact amount by instinct, tamping and raking until the glow settled just right. 100 weight of coal slack cost about $1, far cheaper than fresh coal. The whole technique was about economy, keeping warmth alive through the darkest hours without wasting fuel. When gas central heating arrived, the art of banking a fire vanished within a generation. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. Here is where modern sensibilities clash with old wisdom. Lard on the chest. Yes, actual lard. When a child developed croup or a rattling chest cough, some grandmothers skipped the camphor entirely and went straight for the kitchen lard. A thick smear of warm lard on the chest, covered with brown paper and then flannel, created a sealed heat pack that drew moisture and eased breathing. The brown paper was crucial. It trapped the heat and stopped the lard soaking through. Doctors at the time did not discourage it. District nurses recommended it in homes where camphorated oil was too expensive. The lard itself cost almost nothing, a scrape from the block that sat beside the stove. We recoil at the idea now, but the principle of an occlusive warm compress is used in wound care and respiratory therapy to this day. Your grandmother just used what she had. Number 11. Haybox cooking. During the coldest months, fuel was precious. Your grandmother could not afford to keep the range burning all day just to cook a stew, so she used a haybox. She would bring the pot to a rolling boil on the range, then transfer it immediately into a wooden box lined thickly with hay, straw, or old blankets. The insulation held the temperature high enough to continue cooking for hours without any additional fuel. A stew started at 8 a.m. would be tender and ready by tea time. Porridge, rice pudding, soups, and root vegetables all worked perfectly. The haybox was standard equipment in rural homes and was promoted by the Women's Institute during both wars. The savings were enormous. A family could cut their coal use by a quarter through winter simply by finishing their cooking in the haybox. The concept is identical to modern thermal cookers sold for £60. Your grandmother built one from a tea chest and last year's straw. Number 10. Elderberry syrup for winter illness. Every autumn, your grandmother picked elderberries from the hedgerows and simmered them with sugar and cloves into a thick, dark syrup that she bottled and stored in the pantry. At the first sign of a winter cold, every family member got a tablespoon. Children took it on a spoon with a grimace. Adults stirred it into hot water with lemon. The syrup was the household's first line of defense against colds and flu from November through March. A pound of elderberries was free from any hedgerow. Sugar cost about 6p a pound. One batch lasted the whole winter. For decades, this was dismissed as folklore. Then, in 2019, researchers reviewed multiple studies and found that elderberry supplementation significantly reduced the duration and severity of upper respiratory symptoms. Those findings were published in a peer-reviewed journal. Your grandmother's hedgerow medicine was backed by science all along. We just forgot to ask. Number 9. Rendering tallow for emergency candles. Power cuts were a winter certainty in the 1940s and 1950s. Your grandmother always had a supply of homemade tallow candles stored in the back of the cupboard. She rendered beef fat, strained it clean, and poured it into molds made from old tin cans, with a cotton string wick held in place by a pencil laid across the top. The candles burned longer and brighter than cheap paraffin ones from the shop. A single Sunday roast produced enough tallow for 3 or 4 emergency candles. Some families kept a dedicated candle tin, topped up after every roast through the winter months. When the lights went out, and they went out often, those tallow candles were not just light, they were warmth, comfort, and the ability to keep going. The smell of beef fat burning became the smell of resilience. We buy scented candles now for £10 each. Your grandmother made hers from scraps, and they actually served a purpose. Number 8. Stone hot water bottles in the oven. Before rubber hot water bottles were affordable, every home had a stoneware bottle. These heavy ceramic vessels were filled with boiling water, stoppered with a cork, and wrapped in a knitted cover. But your grandmother had a second trick. She would place the empty stoneware bottle in the oven beside the fire for 20 minutes, heating the clay itself. Even without water, the heated stone radiated warmth for hours. On the coldest nights, she would use both methods. A water-filled bottle warmed the bed for the first few hours, and a dry, heated stone bottle was placed at the foot of the bed for the long stretch until morning. The clay held heat so steadily that children never woke from the cold. A stoneware bottle cost about 2 shillings and lasted a lifetime. Some families still have their grandmother's bottle, chipped and stained, but perfectly functional. Number 7. Tinfoil behind the radiator. When central heating finally arrived in British homes during the 1960s, your grandmother immediately noticed that the wall behind the radiator was always warm. Heat was pouring straight through the brickwork and escaping outside. Her solution was simple. She taped sheets of aluminium foil, shiny side facing into the room, to the wall behind every radiator. The foil reflected heat back into the room instead of letting it soak into the wall. Engineers at Sheffield tested this principle and confirmed it reduces heat loss through the wall behind a radiator significantly. A roll of kitchen foil cost about 1 6. The entire house could be done in an afternoon. Radiator reflector panels are now sold commercially for £15 each. They work on exactly the same principle your grandmother discovered, with a roll of baker foil and common sense. 6. Onion syrup cough remedy. At the first sound of a winter cough, your grandmother sliced a large onion into rings, layered them in a bowl with sugar, covered it with a plate, and left it overnight. By morning, the sugar had drawn out the onion juice, creating a thin amber syrup. A teaspoon every few hours soothed sore throats and calmed coughs. The taste was strong, sweet, and sharp, but it worked. Children swallowed it with a shudder and a glass of water. The onion's natural compounds acted as a mild expectorant, loosening phlegm and easing irritation. An onion cost a penny, and sugar was already in the cupboard. The remedy was essentially free and could be made fresh every night through the worst of winter. Some grandmothers added a squeeze of lemon or a spoonful of honey. Chemists sold patent cough syrups for £1 shilling, but most families trusted the onion first. Modern herbalists still recommend this preparation, and the science supports it. Onion contains quercetin, a compound with anti-inflammatory properties now studied in clinical trials. When outdoor work demanded hours in bitter cold, your grandfather layered sheets of newspaper between his shirt and his jacket. The paper created an additional insulating layer that trapped body heat against the torso. Cyclists, postmen, and outdoor workers across Britain used this technique routinely through the 1940s and the 1950s. A single sheet of broadsheet newspaper across the chest and back could make the difference between shivering and coping. The paper had also acted as a windbreak, stopping cold air from penetrating thin work clothes. It rustled when you moved, and colleagues knew the sound. Nobody mocked it. Everyone did it. Marathon runners still use foil blankets on the same principle today. Your grandfather used the telegraph, and it did the same job for nothing. Number 4. The communal copper for hot water. In homes without running hot water, which was most of them until the late 1950s, the copper boiler in the scullery was the source of all warmth. Your grandmother lit the fire beneath it early on Monday morning for wash day, but she was not wasteful. Every drop of that heated water served multiple purposes. First, the whites were boiled, then the coloreds went in. Then the remaining warm water filled the tin bath for the children. Then it was used to scrub the kitchen floor. Finally, the last lukewarm dregs went on to the garden. Nothing was wasted. A single fire heated enough water for an entire day of washing, bathing, and cleaning. The skill was in sequencing, knowing what needed the hottest water and working down in temperature. That copper boiler taught a generation about resource management that we have entirely lost. Third pattern break. Here is something you will not believe worked. Cabbage leaves for joint pain. When the cold made arthritis flare, your grandmother would take a large outer leaf of Savoy cabbage, score the veins with a knife to release the juices, warm the leaf over the range until it softened, and wrap it around the painful knee or wrist with a bandage. She would leave it on overnight. By morning, the swelling was down, and the pain eased. For decades, this was dismissed as pure superstition. Then, a study published in the journal Clinical Practice found that cabbage leaf wraps were comparable to topical anti-inflammatory gel for treating knee osteoarthritis. The leaves contain plant compounds that reduce inflammation when held against the skin. Your grandmother did not know the chemistry. She just knew it worked because her mother told her, and her mother before that. Your grandmother did not panic buy when snow was forecast. She did not need to. Her store cupboard was a permanent winter survival kit, maintained from September through March. Tins of corned beef, condensed milk, cocoa, dried pulses, bags of flour, sugar, tea, and oats were stacked in strict rotation. First in, first out. She knew exactly how many days each shelf could sustain the family without a single trip to the shops. 2 weeks was standard. Some families managed 3. The cupboard was checked and topped up every Friday after the weekly shop. Nothing expired because everything rotated. When snow blocked the roads or strikes closed the shops, there was no panic. There was tea, there was soup, and there was enough to share with the neighbor. That system, simple and disciplined, is identical to what modern preppers spend hundreds building. Your grandmother maintained it on a housekeeping budget of £2 a week. And finally, number 1. The whole house heat circuit. Your grandmother did not try to heat every room. She heated one room properly and managed the rest. The kitchen range was the heart. Doors stayed shut, curtains drawn at 4 o'clock sharp, draft excluders down, unused chimneys blocked. The family gathered in the warm kitchen after tea and only separated to go to pre-warmed beds. Every trick on this list was part of that connected system. Not isolated tips, but a complete way of living through cold. We turned up the thermostat and forgot the lot. Share which one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the bed brick gets more love than the cabbage leaf. These were not just survival tricks. They were engineering solutions from people who could not afford to get winter wrong. Your grandmother knew. Now you know too.